Welcome to Neuro Movement Revolution with Anat Benyel, where you will discover breakthrough possibilities for your life through the brain's power to change. We're so happy that you can join us in making the impossible possible.
Hello, everyone. Wonderful to welcome you to our Neuro Movement Revolution podcast. I am really beyond delighted to have our guest, Dana Jackson Nakazawa, today with us. It's a real treat. You'll see. Dana Jackson Nakazawa is an award-winning journalist and internationally recognized speaker whose work explores the intersection of neuroscience, immunology, and human emotion. Her mission is to translate emerging science in ways that help those with chronic conditions find healing. She's the author of 6 books, including the newest, The Angel and the Assassin, the tiny brain cell that changed the course of medicine, which illuminates recent groundbreaking discoveries that elucidate the biological link between our physical and mental health. The book has been, the book has been hailed as riveting, stunning, and visionary. The Angel and the Assassin offers us a radically reconceived picture of human health. Dana has written a number of very important other books, like Childhood Disrupted, How Your Biography Becomes Your Biology, and How You Can Heal, The Best Cure, and the Autoimmune Epidemic, and Does Anybody Else Look Like Me? It's a parent's guide to raising multicultural children. Dana has just come out also with a new program, Create Your Healing Narrative, a writing to heal and neuro re-narrating program. We're going to talk about Dana's new book, and we're going to talk, about her new program. Dana, I am so happy to have you here. I feel like we're just going to, call your brain, just go explore. You have such enormous knowledge. And anyway, so
I'm so pleased to be here, Anat.
Yeah.
Such a believer and fan of your work, and just you and I work on the same sorts of things from different directions, and the research and science is now at a place where we're kind of coming together.
Yes, absolutely. I came at the fact, as I understand the fundamentals, in a sense of what you do, which is to figure out the interrelationship and the holistic existence of what we call mind and body, or right, emotion and psychology and body. I left psychology, and I also, a background in science, statistics, and so on. But the traditional psychotherapeutic route, because I was missing the biology in the body. Mm-hmm. So I literally, that's what got me to get on the path I'm on. So it's very exciting, and you have so much knowledge I do not have. So I'd like to
right back at you.
Sorry, what?
Right back at you. Same, right?
Yeah. And for our listeners and our audience, I think it's very important. So let's start first diving into The Angel and the Assassin. And I'm just looking here in my notes here. Can you just say a few words? What is The Angel and the Assassin about?
So The Angel and the Assassin I began writing it about 3 years ago as huge sea change was happening among neuroscientists. So because I'm a journalist scholar, I spend a lot of time talking to neuroscientists and immunologists and um, people in psychoneuroimmunology and seeing where we are in terms of our understanding of this link in the mind body connection and how it's a biophysical link. And things were just exploding around that time. And much of it was having to do with a new understanding of a tiny little cell, the smallest cell in the brain. It makes up about 10% of the brain cells that you have, that you're walking around with right now, called microglia, micro for small, and glia for non-neuronal cell. And the excitement around this little cell, I would have dinner with a neuroscientist and they'd be gesticulating about how it's changing everything that we thought we understood about the brain. And here's why. This little cell, which was first discovered in the 1920s by a group of Spanish neuroscientists, they kind of ignored it. They thought, okay, this is a little tiny housekeeper cell, and indeed microglia do this. It goes in, and when there's trash in the brain, it kind of dot 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 picks it up, takes it, puts it in the trash can. They were called the housekeeper cells of the brain. But starting around 2007 until 2017, for about 10 years, a group of neuroscientists decided to look more closely at this tiny little cell, and they found that a number of fascinating things. One, on the 7th day of gestation, this tiny little cell breaks off from the white blood cells in the developing fetus and migrates up to the brain, where it resides for the rest of our lifetime. Now, your listeners may know, and you certainly know, that for the longest time, really for 300 years since Descartes developed mind-body dualism, the belief has been that mind and body work very separately. Anybody who's sat in a psychiatrist's office knows this to be true. The idea is that the brain has an immune system. It functions, below the neck, below the blood-brain barrier, which is this dense constellation of cells at the back of the brain. And that the immune system of the body functions, and the brain is, the classic term, immune privileged. We were all taught that in biology. We were all taught it as science journalists. And in journalism, the brain is immune privileged. But what these neuroscientists were finding was that it was entirely wrong. We've had this little brain, this little cell that functions as an immune system. It is in constant conversation with our white blood cells and our T cells in our body. Anything that affects the health of the body, we're talking everything from COVID to toxins to chronic stressors, affects the immune health of the brain. This is so wild. It's so new. It's such a paradigm shift. And I decided to, spend a year and a half of my life going in neuroscientist labs and immunologist labs to figure out more about what they were seeing, and then to go into psychiatry and psychology and figure out how are they hoping to use this understanding that brain and body are not separate. We understand the link on a very precise biological level, and anything that affects the body's immune system will affect the health of your brain. And we can get into the details of how microglia do that. But that was just that very exciting, that's what we do as journalists. Like, why aren't people talking about this? Everyone knows it. And we have this saying that it takes about 20 years for things to go from the lab bench to the clinic, right? And I think that's too long to offer this big picture of hope and possibility for how we can affect our own health.
So you said that it takes a long time for things to go, from the science part to the application part and to people's lives. I find that oftentimes it doesn't even go.
That's right.
you know. And then what you have, people do it in life, and very often the science goes like it doesn't fit into the science, so this is like not the real deal. Somehow it's not valid because they don't know how it works. So you know, so there has been, there's a lot of, but there's so much more connection nowadays between the two, and so many more people that are interested in both sides of the equation. So how about, very quickly, if you don't mind to, you said we'll go into it later, how does the microglia cell
Mhm.
operate, and how does it relate between?
Yeah. So microglia are actually not glial cells. They were misnamed and put in this housekeeping category by early neuroscientists. They are part of a group of other glial cells, even though they're not glial cells, they're immune cells. So that's part of our problem, right? Is like the nomenclature is just wrong, and therefore it's very hard. Sometimes instead of even calling them microglia, I just call them neuroimmune cells, these newly discovered neuroimmune cells. And then people will have an easier time wrapping their head around it. So what these neuroimmune cells do that we didn't know we had, what they do is they are communicating with your body's immune system so that anytime anything comes to the awareness of the body, let's think of it this way. Let me step back for a minute. We have, five senses, six if we count proprioception, but we have all of our five senses, proprioception. Our brain, as you know better than anybody, is dancing with our environment 24/7. Just in the time we've had this conversation, we're getting millions of messages about whether we're safe or we're not safe, and a car could go streaming by, blaring by outside, and the dog might start barking, or somebody comes in and, walks by with something like that smells terrible and seems toxic. The brain, that's its job. Are you safe or are you not safe? Are you safe or are you not safe? And in this intricate 24/7 dance that the brain is doing to give you that information, microglia are its top sentry leaders. They are going to decide what action to take based on these millions of messages that the brain is getting. And when microglia, remember, as much as 10% of the cells in your brain, when they think, okay, look, there's bad stuff coming, or there are too many chronic, unpredictable stressors, just like the white blood cells in the body get hyperactive and create inflammation, microglia do something a little different. They don't make the brain red hot, painful, and swollen, right? In the body, inflammation is red hot, painful, swollen. You are hanging a picture, you hit your thumb with a hammer, and your thumb swells up. The brain works differently. It doesn't have anywhere to swell because of the skull, right? So it has to work a little differently. Neuroinflammation is different than physical inflammation, which is another reason why we missed this connection between brain inflammation and mental health and cognitive issues. So microglia, and I sat in neuroscientist lab at Harvard and watched them dance through the brain, a brain that's in homeostasis. And they're like these beautiful, elegant dancers. They run around the brain and they knock on neurons. Knock, knock, are you doing okay? And like the good doctor of the brain. And then they keep doing this, and each set of microglia have a little area of the brain that they're in charge of. And they make sure that everyone's humming, and they're the angels of the brain. But when there are too many chronic or toxic stressors, and again, I want to define that, everything from infection, virus, chronic unpredictable stress, trauma, physical trauma, when it adds up, microglia can morph into these big Pac-Man like cells. And when they do that, they can begin to do two things. They spit out neuroinflammatory factors, which are really bad for brain health and bad for neurons and synapses. So synapses are those connections between neurons, and they fire and wire together, and they go around and they nibble on synaptic connections. So at Harvard, two scientists, Beth Stevens, who's just world famous for her discoveries about microglia, and Dory Schaefer, who's now at University of Massachusetts, they found synaptic material in the belly of the microglia, right? So for a long time, there has been a question in mental health. How is it that individuals who are suffering from mental health and cognitive disorders show these changes and lack of certain neural circuitry on brain scans?
So Dana,
yes,
let's continue after the disruption.
yes.
Okay?
So it's a good example for things are very disrupted right now for all of us in so many ways. And yeah, deep breath.
We'll just keep going. So you were saying that the scientists were really curious. You said that they found this, the glial cell, the neural material in the glial cell belly.
That's right. And so what happened is they had this theory, how is it that synapses disappear in the brain? We know they disappear very early on in Alzheimer's, even before symptoms appear. We know that when you take individuals with depression, anxiety, bipolar, autism, schizophrenia, you see different types of changes in the brain, in different areas of the brain, in neural structure. And so neural connectivity, a loss of neural connectivity, or in some cases, too much neural activity, like in the amygdala in anxiety disorders and fear states, we see that the brain changes. Well, if the brain's changing, it's changing because of changes to synaptic connectivity. Synapses are disappearing. How? How was that happening? And no one had asked that question before these young female researchers decided to take a closer look at microglia, with the idea that it might be possible that they were responsible for these changes in synaptic connectivity in the brain. And they worked crazy hard to prove this, reprove it, show it again and again. And then in 2012, they were able to tell people, we can see that microglia can overprune the brain. This was a huge moment in neuroscience, changed everything we thought we knew about the brain-body connection. Now, I want to add something else that was being discovered around the same time, was the fact that when individuals have heightened levels of physical inflammation, that means higher rates of C-reactive protein, IL-6, all the different interleukin factors. On basic blood tests, these individuals were also more likely to suffer from neuropsychiatric disorders. So how was it that inflammation in the body was related to a lack or shift in neuroconnectivity in the brain? All of a sudden, microglia began to make that connection clear. Again, the body and the brain are dancing with our environment 24/7. Are you safe or are you not safe, right? Microglia take that in just like our immune cells in the body. And when they decide that you are not safe and become overactive, it can lead to not only an elevated immune response in the body, like we know with the heart, right? High levels of C-reactive protein often mean that there's heart disease or the potential for heart disease. It also means that this beautiful, complicated electrical organ between here and here is also having a response that will shift the neuroimmune health of the brain.
And do they also go into these chew-up connections as a result?
So I want to be clear that microglia, when activated, munch on neurons. They are either causal. The one area in which we think they're causal in changes in the brain is Alzheimer's. So a lot of work has been done. Beth Stevens won a MacArthur grant for her work in this area. How much they're playing together with other factors in the brain and other glial cells in neuropsychiatric disease is something that is still being worked on. They have a starring role, we can say that, but what exactly causes them to shift from the angel state to the assassin state? This is something that researchers are working on now. They're creating like little barcodes almost for microglia in their different states. And then they watch the barcodes change in different circumstances so that they can begin to see what is it exactly that's causing them to go from these elegant dancers to these big Pac-Men and cause havoc and spit out neuroinflammation. So it's the beginning of a really new understanding of brain health and how the body and the brain crosstalk. They crosstalk all the time, 24/7. Around the same time, new vessels were discovered in the brain, lymphatic vessels. Your lymphatic vessels kind of wash out debris. And it was always thought, in addition to the brain being immune privileged, that lymphatic vessels did not rise up into the brain. But in 2016, Yoni Kipnis at UVA, who's now at WashU, discovered lymphatic vessels ferrying immune messages into the brain itself, into the meningeal spaces, which are these very rich blood vessels that run along the top of the brain. So the last decade was just a crazy time in neuroscience. And I wanted to, no one was standing on the mountaintop and connecting these dots. And so I wanted to set out and tell the story of this
phenomenal
set of discoveries in this tiny little cell, not just to focus on the cell, but because we can say now, your brain needs the same attention that we tend to give our body. For the past 20 years, I've certainly reported on and written many magazine articles and reported on psychoneuroimmunology and the idea that we've got to protect our body's immune health. When I wrote The Autoimmune Epidemic in 2008, that was a crazy idea. Your immune health, what are we talking about? Well, we get that now. And now it's time to embrace and apply that same love and care for ourselves and our well-being to our brain.
Wow. I get shivers running through my body. It's amazing. Oh, I've got so many questions, but I'm going to move it also in direction that we have also a very large population of parents of children with special needs. Mm-hmm. And so not quite yet, but I'm going to take it there.
Yeah.
So, but in a sense, we're going there. You've written a lot about how trauma in early childhood has a dramatic impact on the immune system and the brain. And, so I'd like you to talk through this venue, but basically that early trauma has lifelong impact.
That's right. That's right.
So how about first you say, talk about that a little bit, and then I have another question. I have like 10 questions.
Yes. So we know a great deal about this now. My book, Childhood Disrupted, was really the first book to delve deeply into the ACEs Adverse Childhood Experiences Study, which showed us the work started in 1995. And since we have 3,000 well-reviewed, peer-reviewed studies showing the relationship between different types of adversity in childhood and later teen and adult health outcomes. And so these different types of adversity fall into 3 kinds of buckets. One are household stressors, and that could be very severe household stressors like sexual abuse or physical abuse, but they can also be things that we think of as what I call living room variety trauma, right? Like things that many people grow up with, having a parent who chronically puts you down or humiliates you, growing up with a parent with an anxiety disorder or an untreated mental health disorder, growing up with parents who never stop bickering, growing up with parents who divorce, losing a parent to death or divorce or separation. All of these things and many other categories fall under these childhood stressors that are household oriented. There are also community stressors. Growing up with community violence, in food deserts where you can't get good food, with racism, sexism, school shootings. And then there are environmental stressors such as a pandemic, climate change, hurricanes, all of these different things. When we talked earlier, Anat, about how our brain is deciding, am I safe or not safe? Throughout childhood and the teen years, the brain is really making itself in response to this question, am I safe or not safe? And in an effort to help a child be more prepared for the world that it's clearly dealing with and the world that it's about to go into as an adult, the brain begins to shape itself on those messages. And how it does that is now with microglia, we understand it better. Chronic unpredictable stress shifts the function of the immune system by getting the immune system revved up in ways that we know, based on very good research, alter the genes that oversee the stress response, literally epigenetically shift the genes on all 23 chromosomes that are responsible for overseeing the stress response. And when that happens, those genes, think of them this way. You're very stressed. Your stress response goes on, it turns on. You see a bear in the woods, it turns on, your body goes into fight, flight, freeze. And let's say the bear decides to go the other way, he shrugs and walks off. Your stress response turns back off. You go into homeostasis, rest, relaxation, what we call rest and digest. But in children who grow up with chronic unpredictable stress, this stress immune response gets turned on and undergoes epigenetic shifts in how those genes work and keeps that stress response on. It's protective, a state of hypervigilance, preparing one to go into a world that will not be safe, right? Over time, this causes higher levels of inflammation, what we talked about earlier, which can, we can see through blood tests of CRP and IL-6 and other types of inflammation. And inflammation over time contributes to physical disease, neuroinflammatory disorders, autoimmune disease. We see very high correlations between having categories of adversity in childhood or ACEs and later developing autoimmune disease, heart disease, cancer, and mental health disorders. And it's a certain number of ACEs, 6 or more growing up, take 20 years off an individual's lifespan. So this research marries with neuroscience now in a way that gives us a radically reconceived picture of human well-being.
I am going to shift the direction I thought I was going to go at, because without knowing all those details, and it was actually, I learned that from my teacher, Dr. Feldenkrais. He said the number one factor that is absolutely the ground that we have to make sure is there when we work with people, or otherwise learning, positive learning, change, growth in the brain and all that stuff will not happen, is safety.
That's right.
all the way to the point that the tables that we work on, he designed it. He was also, an engineer and all. He was everything kind of thing. He designed it so a full-grown adult can stand in one corner of the table and it will not tip.
Wow.
You see, for example, massage tables very often are tall and not very stable. So you go on them and you have to be careful because they feel like they can wobble and so on. That by itself is already not a good idea. The question I have to pose to you here, so we agree safety is so important, the opposite of it, especially chronic or chronically unpredictable or very extreme events and so on. How does the immune response and the glial cells, or the immune cells, as you call them, neuroimmune cells, relate, or what happens to learning when we're in that condition?
Right. So actually, you and I have a mutual friend who did a lot of the work in this area, Christina Bethel at Hopkins. And she was able to find that many different students who were showing learning issues in school had high ACE scores. And conversely, that kids with high ACE scores had trouble in school noticing and being able to work well with others, asking for help, accepting help. Often they were kids who had attention disorders and so on and so forth. And so she really did some amazing work in this area, showing a correlation between the number of adverse childhood experiences at home and issues in school performance, and being able to, just take in the good, right? Like getting into the classroom and just being able to take in the good that's happening and not be stuck in, this very tight and worried state. So this has been a huge shift in education, where educators are now starting to say, look, let's not punish, let's take kids who are having struggles and let's find out what's happening to them and to create safety, because 9 times out of 10, a kid who is coming in and presenting with learning and other behavioral issues is doing the best they can to manage a stack of stressors. And so her work in that area has been really astonishing and very, very helpful. Learning can't happen in that brain. Learning can't happen in a brain that's in a fear state. Learning can't happen.
And I think from my experience and my way of wording it, everything that occurs to us, including those unintentional, global responses that happen, and loss of connections in the brain and all that stuff that happens under stress and all that, actually becomes a learned pattern.
Absolutely.
So then, so that's also where the hope is. That's where the opportunity lies, because it is a learned response, and that's leading me in a second to my next question. But let's take it to the next question. Has there been research that shows, or there have been studies, that when you are able to move the system, either in children or adults, to experiences of safety, that you see shifts in how the metabolic processes happen in the brain?
We're not there yet. Where we are is that you can see differences in kids in schools when they're treated based on safety versus punitively. Yeah. When we establish safety for kids, it begins to create a shift in their ability to learn. And a big part of that goes safety. A child who's well regulated, so they're not showing up with behavioral issues at school, they're well regulated, they can hear and feel and see when they're starting to get out of sync with themselves, and they can begin to ask for help or take action. that comes after hundreds of exposures to a well-regulated adult, right?
Yeah.
So that's the only way that it happens. That's the only way that it happens. It doesn't happen without that. And yet the good news there is that a well-regulated adult begins to re-regulate the child.
Yeah.
So that's the hope. This is not a done deal for kids.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
I know you know better than anybody.
This is the basis of my work. I just want to plug here that it can start happening within seconds. It can start happening within minutes. It's not necessarily something that's can be recreated by the child right away. Mm-hmm. And it's so very exciting. So, I just want to make a statement and see if you would like to speak to that, because for me, what you just said, and even before you said that, but it's just so in front of me, that means that the whole field of rehabilitation for adults and for working with children with special needs, the way so much of it is done, like in physical therapies and so on, actually drives the brain in the negative direction. That means that if we take a child, for example, that has cerebral palsy and they whatever the brain damage and is not figured out how to differentiate, we won't go into why that's happening, but it's not an ill brain. It's just an injured brain. So it's a healthy brain with a deficiency, but it's not the whole system is not okay, right? By its own nature. And then you ask it to do something it can't do, it doesn't know how to get to, and on top of it, it might be also painful. And maybe, the adult or the mom and everybody's in the room and they still keep doing it and it's painful. Very quickly, what happens to that brain? Talk to me about it.
Well, so
it's so important to shift that.
I do not, I've thought a lot about this, and I don't work with children at all, so I can't even speak to that. I truly can't. But I have a lot of chronic pain issues from having been paralyzed twice and losing a lot of myelin from an autoimmune disease, and lost many years of my life to that. I have chronic neural pain from those periods of demyelination. And although I'm very lucky to be standing and walking, and I had a really brutal accident about 12 years ago, and I have to work with chronic pain every single day. And I think a lot about this because as I am doing certain exercises to stretch out the neural tension, which is incredible in my body, as my neurologist has said, anybody else would maybe have, if you have $1 to spend with this group of muscles and your nerve connections, if anybody has $1 to spend, you have 10 cents, use it wisely. And that's a miracle because I was in a wheelchair for a long time. So it's a miracle. But there is a lot of pain that comes with this, and with in the result of the accident that I had, that I've been in physical therapy for 12 years, once or twice a week ever since. And so I think a lot about it, like what messages am I sending my brain when I do these exercises, that I'm not safe unless I do them. They seem to give me some sense of safety, and they stretch out certain things and stretch out my discs. But then I flare again. And I have a big flare again, and I'm actually having a flare now. And not just today, but for the past 2 weeks, just from doing a Wim Hof movement the wrong way. It was on me, on nobody else. But so is my body that afraid that I've created these neural pathways for these pains, this recurring pain? Would it be better if I were spending more time on my thoughts and my beliefs about my body and not staying in a fear state? I've been thinking a lot about it, but I'm not here to give any answers, right? Because I know physical therapy has helped me tremendously. It prevented all kinds of, surgeries from happening and stretches out some of these neural tension issues. Is it a good and bad bag? I ask myself that a lot. Like, I'm so afraid now. If I move this way, that'll happen. If I move that way, that's coming from this physical orientation about my body and my nerves and my discs and are my feet numb today. I don't have the answers, but if you have them, and I know you do, you know.
Well, I'm interviewing you this time. So.
Yes, no, I mean, but
yeah.
You know, that's a blessing. And so I've tried to walk a line between this is really helping with neural tension and where is my head at when I do this? Am I using this as a tool for good, or am I using it as a tool to like whack myself over the head with how unsafe I am?
Yeah.
So I think some of it is in the orientation, but that's the best answer that I can give, is really a personal one.
Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you for, letting us all in on your amazing, you're heroic actually. So
well,
I'll keep going with the questions. So let's talk just briefly more about, let me ask you a quick, I don't know if it has a quick answer, but people talk about stress and excessive stress being a problem. And that notion was already brought, what was it, 30, 40 years ago, and that and it didn't have any of the details we have today, but it was, I don't remember who wrote the book about, the big book about stress and don't overstress.
Benson, I think.
Yes. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So, but you use the term toxic stress and stress.
Yeah.
Can you just give the distinction between, if there is one, between the term toxic stress and stress?
Sure. And I think about that a lot. So when is a stress toxic? And I have a new book I'm finishing for Random House, and I talk a lot about this in the new book. So toxic stress is when it's repeated, it's chronic, and it's unpredictable. So you can go into a lab, and deep, apology to the animals out there who are in lab experiments, but you can watch how researchers introduce immune changes through chronic unpredictable stress in lab animals. So you might have some mice, and on Tuesdays at some unknown time, you start flashing strobe lights, and specified period of time later, you start rocking their cage. And another day you wet their bedding. They really, really don't like that, right? And over time, you see these dramatic immune shifts in these mice. But if you go in and you give the mice a stimuli that they don't like a little painful tap to the foot, and you do it every Tuesday at 1:00, the mice don't respond in the same way because they're expecting it and they know that it's coming. So what does that mean in terms of our understanding of chronic stress? It means that the unpredictability, think of a kid in a living room who has a parent with a drinking disorder or a mental health disorder. You just don't know, is your parent going to buy you pink sparkly shoes and tell you how cute you are and take you to school and hug you when you come out? Or are they going to say, you're so stupid with math, you're the dumbest kid ever, I'm not helping you ever again? Or are they going to come in and smile and have a nice dinner with you? Or are they going to come in and whack you with their belt because they stopped at the bar on the way home? That unpredictability is what we're talking about toxic stress. We're all living with it right now. We don't know when we'll be able to go back in the world with the pandemic. We don't know what's happening with our political scene, with the inauguration tomorrow. This introduction of chronic uncertainty is toxic stress. But there's another factor to toxic stress, and that is the perception that we have. And I'm going to go back to that word that you and I keep coming back to, safety. Do we feel safe? If the brain perceives that is unsafe, chronically, unpredictably, that is toxic stress. And I would add another part, and that is if there is no adult to help regulate them, help them know that they are safe, that is toxic stress. Every child needs one predictable, reliable adult to regulate their nervous system. And that can make toxic stress become manageable stress. And that's a really important thing that I want everyone to know. Part of the reason we're all under so much stress right now is that we have no grown-ups regulating us, right? Like there's been no, I don't want to get political here, but what the hell, there's been no leadership to help bring us through this pandemic. There's been no leadership to bring us together as people across the political divide. Everything has been, ginning it up, making it worse. And many people are reenacting childhood traumas in which they had no reliable adult to help regulate their nervous system. That's kind of where we all are right now.
Yeah. Wow. I mean, this is just so much. Let me just, ask you a question about the lack of predictability. And Neil can help me because I always want to call her the wrong name, but she wrote the book Trauma and Recovery many years ago.
Judith Herman.
Judith Herman. And this has really influenced me quite deeply because there was a lot of knowledge she couldn't have had then, but she realized that every nervous system can get to a breaking point and get post-traumatic stress disorder.
Absolutely.
And she's basically, I think, a person that got that distinction really out there in the world. And a lot of the stress, like the negative stress reaction, comes from the loss of a sense of control. That means the loss of a sense of predictability, like in war zone or in sexual abuse or things like that. However, I know we all know, like childhood things where there's the abuse is routinized. So it is predictable, but still it can have devastating.
Absolutely, 100%. That goes without saying.
Unpredictability.
It's not just even if that kind of abuse happened every Tuesday night at 8:00, it would still be toxic stress because remember the other points. There's no safety.
Yes, exactly.
And there's no safe, reliable adult.
Yeah.
So this is why I made that very complicated explanation of what makes stress toxic. It isn't just the unpredictability. It's the safety, the issue of safety. And I would add another thing, and that is that, when that sense of chronic unsafety arises and there's no reliable adult to co-regulate us, a kid never really develops that ability to regulate themselves. So they're just going out into the world with this chronic sense of unsafety, which will again shift the immune system and shift the neural synapses in the brain over time. So
this is so important and so amazing, all that you're saying. And
can I add one other thing?
Sure,
when it comes to trauma, there's one other factor, and that is that individuals who suffer a lot of trauma, like what we're talking about, one thing that happens when you don't have a safe, reliable adult, whether it's sexual abuse or it's just chronically being put down, right? Like they're very different, right? You would think one is not as horrible as the other, but the brain processes both as chronic unsafety. And when that happens, there's something else that's going on. Kids code things that are bad that are happening as being their fault. We know this, right? From many
in the cause.
Divorce literature where kids whose parents are divorcing go through psychotherapy or therapy because we learned very early on in psychology that kids code parents fighting as their fault. Kids code everything as their fault without a reliable adult to help co-regulate their nervous system. And here's the other reason that chronic stress or that stressors in childhood can be so damaging without reliable adult support. Kids don't get the chance to make that essential leap that what's happening is not their fault. Hey, what's happening to me is wrong. so this is a very crucial part of what constitutes stress. When reliable adults are saying, this is wrong, this shouldn't be happening, it's not okay, and it's not a secret.
Mhm.
That helps to undo
And
the
the whole
toxic
shame
effects
and the
of
shame
stress.
part. Yeah.
Right. And so helping kids make that leap. This is not me. This is wrong and it's happening out there. It's not wrong inside.
Yeah. You know, the thing that I speak, as I say, and to jump back a little bit when you said about the stretching, the neuro stretching and all that stuff, is in the conversation, you know, with the system. So first of all, I say, you know, certainly a parent and a child, they're one brain. They're not two brains. They literally functionally become like the young brain, you know, the dolphins that swim like that.
Yeah.
So and that, but an element that I think is what you were saying, just a practical way of saying it, is if I do something with you and you have a flare up, you are telling me something very powerful. Am I going to listen to it or not? Right? So I know that you probably know this perfectly well verbally, you know, in terms of a conversation. I know you do because I know you well. And I've seen you do that. So if I'm imagining for a moment the same child with cerebral palsy,
Mm-hmm.
and everybody means well, and they try to get the child to, you know, to stand, to have a more freedom in their life and more opportunities and so on. So everybody's meaning well, but the system, so to speak, the child, both the reaction, the physical, what happens, because it doesn't work very well, you know, when it doesn't work very well. And it might be painful. Both that is already, I don't need the child to cry to tell me it's not working. But when the child cries, I've had parents say, you know, I had once a child that didn't hear, a newborn, you know, and and he had, you know, genetic issues, a lot of stuff. But the mother came and said they went to Stanford and they gave him hearing aids. She said every time she puts the hearing aids, he cries really hard. She said, do you know why? I said, well, because it hurts him.
No.
And she said, how do you know? I said, because he cries. You know, said, what should I do? I said, take them out. You know, that's the first thing we do. We take them out. You know, it so happened that when he didn't move, when I worked with him, he started moving for the first time, this kind of very young infant, you know, involuntary random movements. And on the way home, he responded to sound.
Wow.
You see, so the brain was
Right.
organized to be able to do something with a sound. He wasn't really deaf. And by the way, it's a bunch of years. The main mechanism to get him to learn and to develop was through music.
Wow.
You see, so it's one of those weirdo stories, right?
Yeah.
So abuse is not being heard. In my world. It's not just that it's really bad, but it's like not being met. Let's put it this way, not being met.
No, I believe that, you know, the number one thing that happens to individuals who have chronic neuropsychiatric or neurodevelopmental or other issues that affect brain health is not being listened to, is not being listened to.
I mean, literally heard.
And
you know,
heard. And
like when like the opposite was when I don't know how much they still do it, but when I was being trained as a psychotherapist, very often people came with chronic back pain or something and nobody could diagnose it, nobody could find the cause and say it's all in your head. First of all, that's true. Everything is all in our head, including pain and everything. They were right, you just didn't know they were right. But it's such a invalidation. So you get like that's big toxic stress on top of the reality of it. So anyway, so because we don't have that much time.
No, I know you have to go, but
but I want to so I'm thinking maybe to do an additional, just a number 2 with you, if you'll be open to that.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, but I want you to tell us. So first of all, the angel and the assassin
you know, we're going to send the link to everybody with the image of the book and everything like that. So
Thank
people
you.
will know.
Just came out today in paperback, so it's,
Yeah, which is
I think
such
it's
an
like $10
honor.
now or something, you know.
Yeah, I mean, I had a friend in the industry, you know, and they said the most inexpensive item with the greatest value on the market are books.
That's right.
I mean, if people knew the amount of work
I know.
and the amount of years and years of study and hours, God knows
I know.
what,
It's
and then you pay 10, 20, even $30 for
I
that.
know.
You know, it's less than a meal in a restaurant. So I want you to say a few words about your new course.
Yes.
I think it's really, really important. I haven't had a chance to listen to it yet, but I will for sure. And it's good both for professionals,
yes,
and then for everybody else. And
so
I think it's, so I just want to say the title of it. It's Your Healing Narrative, Right to Heal with Neural Re-narrating. It's a little hard to say, yes.
Yeah. So I developed the course because obviously I'm a journalist scholar. I've been spending 30 years interviewing patients and individuals who have had every imaginable hardship, physical, emotional, you name it, and following many of them for years. In the course of each book, I will follow a group of individuals for several years to really delve into their experiences of suffering and healing. And additionally, I've sat with hundreds of neuroscientists and immunologists and neuroimmunologists. Increasingly, the two fields are becoming one. And over the years, I have been through a few things myself, right? Which I described earlier, and other things with my family and my kids. My son was in intensive care for a while when he was born, and later had an autoimmune disease. And my daughter has had her own issues. And life has been super stressful. It's just been super stressful. And life right now is super stressful. So a few years ago, about 3.5 years ago, I started giving a live presentation. You know how when you keynote a conference, then they often say, well, would you like to do a workshop in the afternoon? And I started saying, yeah, I'd like to do a workshop using writing as a tool to reset the nervous system. And we have a lot of great data on this, thanks to the father of this field, James Pennebaker. You know, I didn't discover this myself, but I had learned in interviewing thousands of people how to elicit responses which took them beyond their own resistance, right? To get into the kind of mind-body integrated response that could lead them to a set of awarenesses and release and relief from things they might have been holding on to for a day, a week, a year, or a lifetime. And this became such a powerful tool that I had in my toolbox, and I began to put it together with various science that I had learned about resetting the nervous system. I've written a lot of books. I know a lot of things, and I've worked with a lot of people who talk about different ways to get in and help reset the nervous system. So I've given this at universities and from many professional groups, from healthcare workers to Head Start teachers. And the response was so gratifying for me because I was kind of just taking a chance, you know, let me teach what I know, and not doing it through a book or an article in a magazine or a newspaper. And I just would find myself weeping at how it was able to turn on lights for people and bring them to a different place. So as I got more requests to do it during the pandemic, I decided to turn it into an online course that anyone can do anytime at all. And wow. I spent a lot of time and effort doing it. I certainly, you and I've had talks about the technology involved and, you know, getting microphones and cameras. It was a big leap for me, but I just wanted it to be there. People can go at their own pace. You're not joining anything. It's a course that you do based on 30 years of neuroscience on how to reset the nervous system in ways that we know help reset the brain. It's that simple.
That's phenomenal. We're going to put the information and the links and everything in the podcast so people, and we'll email it to everybody. But your healing narrative, Right to Heal, with neural re-narrating. And you know, we're out of time.
Yes.
but if you're willing, I seriously will just schedule another one.
Great.
And we'll also invite people, when we do the email, we'll invite them to send in questions, because there's going to be a second one, because there's so much to talk about. You are amazing. You are a gift to humanity, literally.
Oh,
and you're also such a wonderful package delivering it. Both, you know, you're so just lovely and wonderful and beautiful. And if you have just one message, one sentence thing to say, because we talked about it a lot about how and we'll talk more about what constitutes and what creates trauma, but also about the opportunities for healing, because everybody has toxic stress at times, at least in their life.
Yes. And I want to be clear, my books are only the first half of every book is about the science, and the second half of every book is about, okay, where the rubber meets the road, like, what are we going to do with this information to help further healing? So I think if I were going to leave people on one message, it's something I remind myself of all the time, is that, you know, now that we understand our brain is dancing with the environment, am I safe or not safe? It's very empowering, right? It's not disempowering. It's very empowering. Like, you are the driver, right? Mm-hmm. You're the driver. If your brain is like, what? Like, hello, brain, what messages am I sending you 24/7? And granted, it's very hard right now not to send the brain some pretty scary messages with a pandemic and the political scene, but we're the driver. And I think the other really important thing is that micro changes matter. Lots of micro changes in the way that we're stacking our day and the way that we're living our lives, they matter. We can take 100 different things and add them little by little into the way in which we are in the world, and put down the phone, which is provoking us that we're unsafe all the time, and step outside and take a breath in the sun for 10 seconds and shift various ways in which we talk to ourselves, which is why I developed the course. It's about neural re-narrating. How are we talking to ourselves? That these micro changes are within all of our domain, and we can begin to make these micro changes. We're the driver of this beautiful organ that's sitting right here and determines so much of our well-being.
That's wonderful. Thank you so much.
Pleasure.
And yes, and till the next one.
Till the next one. Always a pleasure, Anat. Lots of love.
All my pleasure. Thank you so much.
All right. Have a great day, everyone.
Thank you for joining us on Neuro Movement Revolution with Anat Ben-Yael. You will find all of our podcasts and additional resources on our website at www.anatbenyaelmethod.com. You can also subscribe to this podcast for free on iTunes, iHeartRadio, Spotify, Google Play, Stitcher, and TuneIn. We look forward to seeing you online for our next Neuro Movement Revolution.